1960s, Cicero, Chicago. Sam Volpendesto froze at the basement stairs. The smell of blood filled the air. Below, Mad Sam DeStefano, the most feared man in organized crime, waited. DeStefano's voice echoed, "Come down, Goomba," followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone being torn apart. The dark basement swallowed every sound but agonizing grunts. Volpendesto's hand hovered on the railing, shaking. Volpendesto had seen a lot in his life. He had worked with the biggest names in the outfit, Sam Giancana, Capone, but this felt different. This wasn't just another body. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we uncover one of the Mafia's most brutal tools of torture, the meat grinder. Fast forward to the 2000s. Underneath the dim light of buzzing electronics, the FBI agents hunch over their desks, their bleary eyes red from sleepless nights. Coffee cups pile up, but they barely notice. Their attention is on one thing, a voice coming through a wiretap. Volpendesto's voice crackles through the headphones, carrying the weight of a man reliving a life of violence. "I know a bunch of guys who were very dangerous people," he says, as if reminiscing about old friends. The agents exchange uneasy glances. This was more than nostalgia. This was a threat. Volpendesto wasn't just reminiscing about monsters, he was one of them. The mob wasn't dead, it had just gone underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface. It wasn't the force it once was, but that made it even more dangerous. It was quieter, but still deadly. One of the men Volpendesto was talking about was the enforcer, Mad Sam DeStefano. Mad Sam was an Italian mobster whose specialty was loan sharking and collecting debts. He was so violent that the bosses refused to make him a made man. He had judges and cops in his pocket. He loaned money to up-and-coming politicians. There wasn't a mobster in the USA who didn't know his name. His sadism earned him a fierce reputation as a loan shark. You either paid back or you endured torture so extreme you would literally be begging him to finish you off. That's what happened to Peter Capoletti, one of DeStefano's collectors who took $25,000 from one of DeStefano's loan shark victims, and rather than handing it over to DeStefano, he headed to Wisconsin. A few days later, Capoletti was tied to a radiator in Mario's Italian restaurant, owned by DeStefano's brother. His face was almost unrecognizable. One of the other men in attendance, Chucky Grimaldi, later a police informant, said Capoletti was begging for DeStefano to finish him. But before that, DeStefano dragged Capoletti's beaten body upstairs to where Chicago's bigwigs, lawyers, cops, politicians, and judges were enjoying a banquet DeStefano graciously put on for them. Capoletti's family were sitting at one of the tables. With their open mouths filled with food, they recoiled in horror when their loved one was thrown to the floor, his face beaten, his teeth missing, his clothes drenched in blood. DeStefano and his men dumped the body at the feet of Mrs. Capoletti, who suddenly inherited her husband's debt. These were the kinds of old-timers Volpendesto was talking about, men who lived in an era of next-level brutality and who were fond of instruments of torture like the meat grinder. But they aimed it in the right direction, Volpendesto said. Like they used to say in the old days, make sure you get the right guy. In 2011, an ailing 87-year-old Volpendesto rolled into court in a wheelchair, his hair and beard a shock of white. His lawyers pleaded with the judge to let their client die with dignity as a free man. "This is a war hero we have here," said the defense attorney, Bo Brindley. It was true. Brindley presented the jury with a box stacked with Volpendesto's war medals, including the Bronze Star, awarded for heroic achievements. As a young man, Volpendesto went off to fight the Japanese in World War II, coming to the rescue when Japanese kamikaze pilots hit the USS Robley D. Evans in 1945. Volpendesto volunteered to swim into the bowels of the sinking ship, dragging survivors through a sea of red filled with floating bodies. He was a hero. But when the war was over, his life took a different course. He went from art school to low-paid jobs to organized crime. In court all those years later, he was asked if he had anything to say in his own defense. He leaned forward from his wheelchair and told the jury, in his thick Chicago accent, "Maybe I hung around in the wrong place, but I says I never made 2 cents hanging around those scumbags." The prosecutor accepted this man was indeed a war hero, but in no uncertain terms he said, "This doesn't mitigate the evil committed by this man." Volpendesto would not get what he wanted, to die with dignity. We haven't forgotten about our meat grinder story, but let's look more closely at Sam Volpendesto, the only witness to the meat grinder incident. Volpendesto was a guy capable of committing acts of extreme violence long after the days he was hanging around with Mad Sam DiStefano and other old-timers. On May 21, 1990, then 66 years old, he was the owner of a strip club and a brothel, the 2105 Club in Cicero. That day, he and 3 other guys surrounded one of the male employees. "You've been talking to the FBI," growled Volpendesto, sticking a gun against the cowering man's head. The employee pleaded with him. "He was not a rat," he screamed. Volpendesto then walked behind the bar area and produced a baseball bat. He handed it to one of the younger men who worked for him and gave him the order: "Beat the life out of him." Volpendesto watched as his goon mercilessly beat the employee. Among the screams, the crack of broken bones could be heard. But Volpendesto just stood by, unflinching, like he'd seen this kind of thing a million times before. The man was beaten into semi-consciousness, but his life was spared. He was lucky. This wouldn't have happened back in the 60s. That same baseball bat would later be found in a police raid, along with 22 hand grenades and homemade explosive devices. And Volpendesto knew a thing or two about explosives. In 2003, under the orders of outfit boss Mike Fatboy Sarno, Volpendesto blew up a rival video gambling business, destroying the building. From those wiretaps, the FBI knew Volpendesto had lived a life of crime, from robbing jewelers to bombing stores and illegal gambling, and lots of violence, sometimes with members of the outfit and sometimes with the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. But it was the old days where Volpendesto was in his element. This was when Mad Sam DiStefano was feeding men to pigs and digging shallow graves all over the outskirts of Chicago. He was at the forefront of the 1961 murder of William Action Jackson, a typical cruel debt collector for the mob. He was savagely tortured by DiStefano and those other men at a meat rendering plant on Chicago's South Side, a crime now known as one of the most gruesome deaths in U.S. organized crime history. Cops later found his mangled and broken body stuffed into the trunk of a car. DiStefano didn't usually allow his victims' bodies to be found. This was a message. Bodies didn't usually end up being found by police in the trunks of cars. Such gruesome and disrespectful torture was symbolic of whatever Jackson had done, which might have been snitching, although some rumors say it was because he attacked a mobster's wife. DiStefano's usual way of disposing of bodies was digging shallow graves. He'd go out at night in the car looking for spots, and when shallow graves didn't cut it, he visited pig farms. He'd stand and watch them for hours, thinking about who he was going to feed to them next. But even that paled in significance to the meat grinder. And this brings us back to the basement in DiStefano's house. Volpendesto waiting at the top of the steps, not exactly happy about going down to a place known as a torture chamber where many people never returned from. Volpendesto sucked in his breath. He could smell the blood as he slowly walked down the stairs. The metallic air was thick, suffocating. He turned the corner at the bottom to see a mutilated body sprawled on the floor, limbs twisted grotesquely. Pools of blood surrounded it. The air felt heavier, death lingering in the room. Mad Sam DiStefano was in his apron standing over the body, his eyes gleaming with a sick fascination. He sliced a piece of flesh from it and fed it into a meat grinder. The basement was a butcher shop of horrors. As DiStefano cranked the grinder, he looked up at Volpendesto. "I'm making ragu," said Sam, a maniacal grin on his face. Ground-up human flesh slowly landed on a silver tray. Volpendesto's stomach churned. Mario's, the Italian restaurant they frequented, flashed in his mind. Surely, DiStefano couldn't be that deranged. Could they have? No, surely not. Mad Sam cut another piece from the body and slapped it into the grinder. Blood splashed on the floor and the walls. Volpendesto was in disbelief. He had seen some things in his life. He had been a part of some of Chicago's worst brutality, but this was something else. This was depraved. Some of the fingers were missing from the corpse, crudely hacked off. He could only hope the poor schmuck was dead before Mad Sam started turning him into minced meat. Volpendesto started to back up toward the stairs. Mad Sam stopped turning the handle. He gestured to a spare apron with a flick of his head, beckoning Volpendesto to put it on. Volpendesto froze, unsure what to do. Was this a test of loyalty? With a wide grin on his face, DiStefano bent down and picked up the head, holding it like a trophy, before throwing it against the wall close to where Volpendesto was standing. The wet slap of bloody flesh on concrete snapped Volpendesto out of his trance. Looking down, Volpendesto saw the lifeless eyes. Panic took over, his mind spiraled, setting in as the cranking of the meat grinder and Mad Sam's laugh filled the air. This was DeStefano's shock treatment, a brutal demonstration showing Volpendesto what happened to men who crossed the line. The message was clear. Volpendesto slowly reached for the apron. Mad Sam, he didn't live for much longer after the meat grinding incident. He was murdered while sweeping his garage in 1973. As for Volpendesto, he died in prison without the dignity he so dearly wanted on May 17, 2013. On his gravestone at Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery in Elwood, Illinois, is one final message: I did it my way. Now go watch the FBI agent the Mafia wants dead, Donnie Brasco, or click on this video instead.